All right, in this video we're going to work through some Chapter 6 practice problems. The first one I'm going to do is this exercise 6.1 here. So it said Ida Sita Karya is a family-owned company located in the village of Gianyar in Indonesia. So they make a handcrafted musical instrument similar to a xylophone. That thing sells for $850. Here's some information about their operations for last year. So first we're going to assume that they use absorption costing. We're going to calculate the unit product cost for one of these particular instruments. So under absorption costing, aka full costing, we want to make sure we get the full cost of production or all manufacturing costs included in that unit product cost. So that's going to be inclusive of direct materials, direct labor, variable overhead, and fixed overhead. Okay, so let's see what that is for this thing here. Well, direct materials is $100 per instrument. Direct labor is $320. Variable overhead is $40. And then fixed overhead, we've got to do a little bit of math here. So our total fixed overhead for the year is $60,000, and that's based on 250 instruments produced. So if I take that full $60,000 divided by the 250, that's $240 per unit. So my total unit product cost becomes the sum of those four things. So I use the little sum function here in Excel, and there we go, $700. Under variable costing, again, there's really only one difference, right? It's how we treat that fixed overhead. Under absorption costing, we included it as part of that product cost. Under variable costing, we do not. So the variable costing unit cost includes the direct materials of 100, the direct labor of 320, the variable overhead of 40, and that's it. Okay? No fixed overhead. Again, that fixed overhead, to be clear, the full $60,000 would be expensed, so it would hit the income statement in this period under variable costing. So the unit cost under variable costing then, again, just the variable costs of production, so $460. Let's take a look now at exercise 6.2. So referring to this data here in 6.1, it shows us here the absorption costing income statement prepared by the company's accountant for last year. It's in the mini box here. And the requirement says, under absorption costing, how much fixed overhead is included in the company's inventory at the end of last year? Okay? So fixed overhead in inventory at period end. Well, in order to come up with a number there, we have to know how much fixed overhead is assigned per unit on average, as well as how many units are in ending inventory. So if we look back up here, we know that 250 units were produced, 225 were sold, and ending inventory then was 25 units. Those 25 units had $240 in fixed overhead costs assigned to them per unit. So 25 times 240 means we've got $6,000 in fixed overhead costs sitting in inventory at period end under absorption costing. The second requirement here was to put together an income statement using variable costing. So remember at the top line there, sales are certainly no different, 191, 250. Under variable costing, we want to use that contribution format income statement. So we want all of our variable expenses first. So let's say variable cost of goods sold, as well as variable selling and admin. Now that variable cost of goods sold would be the unit product cost under variable costing, the $460, times the number of units sold, which again was 225. So 103,500. Now the variable selling and admin, we know from the 6.1 setup here, was $20 per unit. So $20 per unit times, again, the 225 units sold for a total of $4,500. So sales minus all of those variable expenses would leave us with our contribution margin. So I'm going to do the numbers out to be explicit there. Sales minus variable cost of goods sold minus variable selling and admin. Contribution margin of 250. Then we're going to take away all of our fixed expenses. In this case, we've got the fixed overhead, which we know was in total $60,000. And we also had those fixed selling and admin expenses as well for $20,000. And that leaves us with our net operating income. To be explicit again, contribution margin, $83,250, minus fixed overhead and minus fixed selling and admin, leaves us with net income of $3,250. Now, the other part of part 2 said explain the difference in net operating income between the two costing methods. So as we can see in the box there under absorption costing, it's $9,250. Under variable costing, we just showed that it was $3,250. The difference between those, $6,000, $9,250 minus $3,250 to be clear, $6,000, is exactly equal to the fixed overhead that was deferred in inventory under absorption costing. And that's not a coincidence. Where we said when production and sales are not equal, we're going to have a difference in income between the two costing methods. If production is greater than sales, as it is here, that means we're increasing our inventory levels and we're deferring some inventory costs, some fixed overhead costs in inventory, that is. So our absorption costing net income is going to be higher than our variable costing net income. If the reverse were true, if we had some beginning inventory and we sold more than we made, then the incomes would differ in the opposite direction. Variable costing income would be higher because we'd be releasing some fixed overhead costs from inventory. Okay, so again, the difference in income between the two methods, $6,000, entirely attributable to the fact that we've deferred $6,000 in fixed overhead costs in inventory under absorption costing only. Okay? Under variable costing, all that fixed overhead hit the income statement. All right, let's take a look at exercise 6.4 here, a basic segmented income statement. So that problem said Royal Lawn Care makes and sells two packaged products, this Weed Ban and the Green Grow, kind of fertilizer. Revenue and cost information for those products is shown here in the box. We also know common fixed expenses in the company totaled $33,000 annually. Last year, the company produced and sold 15,000 units of the Weed Ban and 28,000 units of the Green Grow. So the first thing we want to do, or the only thing for that matter, is prepare a contribution format income statement segmented by product lines. So it doesn't matter if you do the company as a whole, on the far left or the far right. I'm going to show the total first, and then the Weed Ban and Green Grow segments, kind of in the columns after that. So first we've got sales. The Weed Ban sells for $6 a unit, and we sold 15,000 units. The Green Grow sells for $7.50, and we sold 28,000 of those. So there's our sales. We want to subtract from that all of our variable expenses. Stick with this contribution format. The Weed Ban had variable expenses of $240 per unit. Again, we sold 15,000 units. The Green Grow had variable expenses of $525. We sold 28,000 units of that product. That would leave us with contribution margin in each segment. For the Weed Ban, the 90,000 in sales minus the 36,000 in variable expenses. And for the Green Grow, 210,000 in sales minus 147,000 in variable expenses. Next up, we would deduct the traceable fixed expenses. For the Weed Ban, we were told that was 45,000. For the Green Grow, just 21,000. So contribution margin minus traceable fixed expenses is equal to our segment margin. And again, from our notes, that's our best indicator of the potential profitability of each individual segment. because we're not dumping the common fixed costs on them. But for the wheat band here, that's their contribution margin of 54,000 minus the traceable fixed of 45. For the green grow, the 63,000 in contribution margin minus 21,000 in traceable fixed. Now at the company-wide level here, we're also going to deduct the common fixed expenses to get us to net operating income. So let's go through and fill out the company-wide view here. Sales, company-wide, is just the sum of the sales across the two segments. Same thing for the variable expenses. Same thing for the contribution margin. Same thing for traceable fixed expenses and segment margin. So I'm just carrying those down here. So total segment margin, 42,000 from the green grow, 9,000 from the wheat band, 51,000 total. Now the company as a whole had common fixed expenses of 33,000. So if we deduct those from the total segment margin across all the segments, we get net income of $18,000 company-wide. And just at a glance here, it looks like both products are contributing something positive to the company's overall potential profitability. So our decision rule is any segment margin, at or above 0 is fine. We probably won't consider dropping that product. Okay? If we have a negative segment margin, then we're going to want to think about whether we should get rid of that product because it's taking away from the company-wide profitability. All right, let's look at exercise 6.5 and talk about company-wide and segment break-even analysis to do one of these explicitly. So here we are at 6.5. Piedmont segments its business into two regions, north and south. We see the contribution format segmented income statement shown in the box here, the company-wide picture, of course, on your left. The first thing we have to do is calculate the company-wide break-even point in dollar sales. So thinking back to Chapter 5 and the Chapter 6 notes, break-even in sales dollars we can always calculate by taking some measure of fixed expenses or fixed costs divided by CM ratio of some kind. Now in the case of a company-wide break-even, we want to make sure that that's the company-wide fixed expenses total and the company-wide CM ratio. So let's figure out what that is. So company-wide fixed expenses and company-wide CM ratio. Company-wide fixed expenses are going to be all of the company's traceable fixed expenses from its individual segments. So in this case, 120,000 right here, plus those common fixed expenses, in this case, 50,000. Okay, so 170,000 total fixed expenses to cover. Now the CM ratio would be the company-wide contribution margin, so 240,000 in this case, divided by company-wide sales, or 600,000 in this case. 40% or 4.4. So then the break-even point becomes the total fixed expenses, 170,000, divided by that 0.4 or 40% CM ratio, for a total break-even of $425,000. Part 2 said calculate the break-even point in dollar sales for the North region. So essentially the same calculation, we just want to be careful about which fixed expenses we include and which CM ratio we use. So let's come up with the North Division CM ratio and the South, since we're going to need it in a second here. The North CM ratio would be its contribution margin, 120,000, divided by its sales, 400,000, 0.3 or 30%. The South has CM of 120,000, same as the North, but that's on sales of just 200,000. So it has a CM ratio of 0.6 or 60%. Always keep in mind, too, what that measure tells us. Of every dollar sales, what portion makes it through to contribution margin and toward that bottom line. For the North, it's only 30 cents on the dollar. The South, it's 60 cents, doing a lot better as far as that mix goes. Okay, so the break-even point here, let's do the North first. We want their fixed expenses, keeping in mind that it's only the traceable fixed expenses, so $60,000, divided by the North CM ratio of 0.3 or 30%. So their segment break-even point, $200,000. Now the South, on the other hand, can be a bit different. Their traceable fixed expenses are also $60,000, but again, their CM ratio was 60% or 0.6. So their break-even point, just $100,000 in sales. Again, a bigger portion of every sales dollar makes it through toward that bottom line. So first the contribution margin and toward covering those traceable fixed expenses and hopefully generating profit. So the South's going to have a much lower break-even point because its CM ratio is significantly higher. All right, any of these questions you wanted to back up and revisit, please do so. And as always, if you have any questions, do let me know.